Personality tests can be a fun way of finding out more about ourselves and how we interact with the world. Today we're going to talk about one specific test, the Myers Briggs Type Indicator. Welcome to WizNugs. Today we're talking about the Myers Briggs test, or the MBTI. The MBTI breaks personality into 4 distinct domains and then assigns a letter to sort of each extreme within that domain. Based on your responses to the questionnaire, it'll assign you one of those 2 letters. And for each of these 4 domains, you get your 4-letter code. I, for example, am an INTJ. There's been a lot written about how to understand yourself using your 4 letters.
So the first time, and I think the only time I've ever taken this test, it was when I was in retail and we had to take it for management training. It was to kind of understand who we are so we could understand ourselves better. And then being able to apply that knowledge to how to then manage people accordingly, right? And I haven't taken it since, so it's probably been 30, 35 years, somewhere in that time frame, probably closer to 30 since I've taken it.
Yeah, and what's cool about this particular personality test is that it can describe the things about you that are kind of standard. They try to ask the same question multiple different ways so that you can think about what's your kind of deeper personality.
For me, like I remember at least the first category, I came out as the E, and that wasn't a surprise to me. Now, I cannot recall the other ones, but I know that a couple of them were like, oh, I didn't know that about myself per se, right? I didn't know I leaned that way.
Yeah, so let's dive in real quick into the 4 different attributes. The first is extroversion versus introversion.
Right.
Now, generally when we talk about introversion, well, that person's shy, and extroversion means, oh, they're outgoing.
And we know that's not really what it means.
Yeah, especially Myers-Briggs specifically, it refers to how you spend or gain energy.
So as an extrovert, I tend to gain energy from being around people or like-minded people and being out there and having events and engaging with them on a regular. That's, I get energy from them.
And for me, that is draining. After a certain period of time out, and it depends on the activity, how draining it is, how fast that wears my battery down. But I need to go and spend some time just being, not necessarily alone, but kind of low-key, maybe with a small group of people, family, friends, that kind of thing. The second one is described as being sensing versus intuitive.
And so what's the definition of those two?
Sensing would be more detail-oriented. When you're learning about a new concept, it might be helpful to walk through a specific example and how that's going to flow through that concept or that process.
Okay.
Whereas an intuitive is going to be more big picture. You talk about the way that something should work, and they're just going to be like, okay, yeah, I get the concept. They may not know all the specifics of how one particular idea or person is going to flow through that process.
So I like the way that you explained it. It's the first one being more hands-on and going through like a practical application versus somebody that you kind of just talk about or explain it, the basic principle once of an idea or thing. And like, yeah, no, I get it. I understand how that works. Again, maybe not all the details, but enough to be to have some kind of internal knowledge or understanding of how a thing should work or should be designed.
To take an example from work, as a programmer, for me, I find intuition really serves me well, that I can understand the logic of how the system should function, and then I can write that code for that. Now, for somebody who's going to be more involved in testing or quality assurance, for them to be more detail-oriented is way better, to be able to say, I need to know exactly what's going to happen in every scenario so that I can mark these things down as a success or a failure of the test.
And it's great to be able to have at least one of each kind working on a project, because then you can have someone who thinks they at least understands how it's supposed to work, and somebody who's going to dive down into the details and try to ferret out anything that's possibly wrong with that particular project.
So that brings us to the third aspect, which is thinking versus feeling.
Right.
Now, this doesn't imply that people who think don't have feelings and people who are more feeling don't also think. This has a tendency to be misrepresented in that way.
Sure.
This is more descriptive of whether you're paying more attention to things and ideas, or if your gut goes right to how it's going to affect people and how they're going to feel about it.
Sure.
So, for example, if I plan a vacation, I'm thinking about the place I'd like to go, what activities are available there, what the amenities are at the hotel, or the restaurant I'd like to try out, or food. When I tell my wife about this plan, she has a tendency to say, well, if we can get the hotel with the pancake machine, that the kids are going to have a better experience because they're going to be easier to deal with because they're going to be happy because they like to watch the little pancake go through the thing.
And it might even go to, and I have a relative in the area. I would love to go and spend some time with her. It's been a long time since I've been there.
Right. The fourth and final dimension is perceiving versus judging. This is another one where the names of these things don't really tell you what they're about.
I think the problem comes that the fact that you're trying to use a singular word to be descriptive of a spectrum is problematic.
And then to break that word down further into just the letter. Right. So now you got to find letters that aren't repeats of the other ones.
Right.
In this case, perceiving refers to basically wanting to keep your options open, feeling kind of stuck when there's a final decision made. Whereas judging, or a J, would be the person who wants to see a decision made and feels uneasy with things being kind of open-ended. Mm-hmm. Now, a person who's high in judging, they might want that decision made, but also be perfectly willing to say, oh, new information comes in, let's shake it up, let's change it, let's do it differently.
So Jordan Peterson talked about something that was along these lines, and it was order and chaos, and that as individuals, we have a balance between those two. We have usually 1 foot in order and 1 foot in chaos. The chaos represents growth and wanting to try new things and learn new things, do new things. And the order represented stability and how regimented my particular daily activities are. So we all have an individual balance in that, and if we get out of our comfort zone, if we step more into chaos, if we're more tend to like order better, then we start feeling like things are out of control and things aren't right and things are out of whack and this isn't normal. And then when you go too much into the other side, where everything is now in order, you feel like you're not moving, you're not going anywhere, nothing's happening in your life. What's going on? Why do I feel like I'm in a rut?
Well, that's an important illustration behind some of the limitations of this kind of test.
Right.
When you're looking at the Myers Briggs specifically, when you take the test, you get these 4 letters assigned. There's a tendency for them to stay the same over time, but I can tell you for sure, the first time that I took this test, I was probably a teenager, and I didn't have kids, and I wasn't in a long-term committed relationship. Now I'm married and I've got 2 children. My feeler side has certainly grown. And everybody has emotions, even if you have a tendency to be more withdrawn and think more about ideas and things.
And I want to say as well on top of that, just because your result indicates a particular letter does not mean that you do not also have attributes that apply to the other side. I brought up in a previous episode that I describe myself as an ambivert because there are times where I fluctuate between wanting to be around people and times that I really just want to be left alone to my own mechanisms and my own interests and my own hobbies, and I don't want interference. I don't need other people because it's draining to me. An example is if I'm working on a particular project at home, and this is a singular person project, I don't want anyone else to come in and start asking me questions about anything. And that's funny coming from me because, I am the question guy, right? But if I'm working on a particular thing and I'm trying to focus on the details of it, and I got people coming into the room and start asking me what I consider to be benign questions, I'm like, can't you see I'm in the middle of something can you just give me a minute? And then I realized, like, okay, this is me and my introvert side, and I find your presence draining. And that sounds cold and callous, but that's the reality of it.
That also illustrates that if, for people who are more on the feeling side, when someone says, look, I'm focusing on something right now, can you please leave me alone? That's not necessarily meant as a cold and callous thing, but it is that. It's a specific descriptor of this is how I'm feeling in this moment.
We talked about this a little bit before, and I consider this particular test a snapshot of who you are at the moment. And as you said, some things will stay consistent throughout time, but there are things that will happen in your life, like family and relationships and jobs and situations in your life that cause you to might shift along that spectrum somewhere.
And if you take this test specifically related to work, you might be in work mode in that headspace where you are more focused on maybe ideas, and maybe you're more focused at that point on details because your job requires you to be really detail oriented. That might not be your real true way of being.
You bring that up, and it just made me think of a real quick example. When we first started working where we currently work, I was doing Uber on the side. And as we started to go to lunch on a regular, you notice that my car was next to immaculate, right? And you're like, wow, this guy really keeps his car clean. You know, he has a little hand towel to wipe off the dash and get the dust off, and there's no trash anywhere. He has a little receptacle for it. And, you know, he has all these, you know, things in his car to keep things, you know, like battery cable, phone cables to, you know, for people to use. And you're like, you know, these are good ideas. You should do that. I should do this too. And then somewhere down the road, I stopped doing Uber, and then the car's condition started to deteriorate. And then you made the comment, it's like, I thought this is who you were. I thought was your personality type, that you were just this clean, immaculate guy. And I'm like, no, it was not for my benefit at all. It was for the customer benefit, right? But that's because I have a mentality of being customer service oriented. What would I want to see if I got into a car? Now, if it's just for me, chaos. Let chaos happen.
It can be a lot of fun to read the write-ups on the different types. It's almost like a horoscope, where it'll tell you, oh, these are things you should find out about in your life. This is how your relationships are going to play out. This is the types that you should seek out to have friendships and relationships with. And then you start to realize that I'm more than just these 4 letters. And over time, it's kind of like, yeah, maybe this isn't for me. So it's worth taking with a grain of salt that this is, I hesitate to say for entertainment purposes only.
Sure.
But there's only so much it can really tell you.
I think that's what you should take away from it. I think what you should take away from this particular test is, if it helps give you insight to some of the decisions that you do, or how you are, or how you act, or how you behave, and some of the results kind of give you idea like, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, well then you have an understanding from your base viewpoint. And then you can move from there if you need to. But it's not definitive in saying this is who you are exactly, and you must act accordingly at all times. And then you feel that you need to change yourself in order to fit that mold.
Yep. One other risk involved in defining yourself in 4 little boxes is that it can have a tendency to limit the growth mindset. If you start to feel like your personality is fixed because, well, I took a test. I had to answer like 100 questions, and it gave me these 4 letters, and now I know who I am.
Yeah, I would think in the case of, if you've been defined by the test as being an introvert, and you now use that as a guideline of what events you will and will not partake in. Like, well, if it's immediate family, okay, I'm fine with that. But if workmates ask me to go out, I'm not going to bother with that, because they're going to be draining according to the tests.
I'm an I. I shouldn't do that.
Yeah. And so then you use that as a reason why you can't go and do things with the other people that you work with, because, well, I know that there are a bunch of E's. I'm an I, and I's don't get along very well with E's, so I'm not going to partake in that. You never know what you missed out on because you decided, based on a result from a test, that I'm no longer going to participate in things or even have interest in it because this told me that I'm this way.
And also the expectation that you meet someone else who has your same 4 letters, that you're just going to be the same person. There's a lot of variation in personality, even within you might have the same 4 letters.
Yeah, I know for me, like if I met somebody who was basically the same person, or at least not same person, but the same indications or indicators, I was like, God, that guy's annoying.
We have a tendency to dislike certain things about ourselves, and when we see them in others.
Yeah, and you don't realize it till you see it in others.
Can be jarring.
Yeah, and that's one of those times you go to your friends like, is that how I am?
I think the big takeaway here is it can be a lot of fun to learn more about yourself through personality testing. It can be a neat little shorthand for this is who I am and how I interact with the world. Don't let it be a limitation. Don't let it be a thing that drags you down or keeps you in a box. You can always grow.
And there's nothing wrong with knowing a little bit more about yourself and having that understanding. But like Casey said, don't let that be the limiter of what your life experiences are. Feel free to take some, risks, if you would, or do some things that are maybe outside of the scope of what you've been indicated as being.
You may find a new hobby, or you may find a new way of interacting with the world that you just never knew before.
So once again, thanks for joining us on WizNugs, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us today on WizNugs. If you liked what you heard, spread the word. For more information, head over to myWizNugs.com.